The chair slammed against the marble floor. Heads turned. Conversations died. The bride stopped smiling. The groom blinked in confusion. And at the center of it all, billionaire Ethan Cole was already on his feet. His eyes were fixed on a woman standing near the entrance of the cathedral. A woman nobody expected to see. A woman most of the Bennett family wished had stayed gone. Seraphina Bennett. For 3 years, she had been absent from every family gathering. 3 years since she had quietly packed her belongings, walked out of the Bennett estate, and built a life of her own. Yet here she was, wearing a simple emerald dress. No jewelry worth bragging about. No entourage. No attempt to impress anyone. And somehow she still commanded the entire room. Claire Bennett's smile faltered. Victoria Bennett's face tightened. Richard Bennett looked away. Nathan Sinclair's chest rose sharply as their eyes met across the room. But Ethan Cole didn't seem to notice any of them. He looked as if he had seen a ghost. "Sir," one of his assistants whispered. Ethan ignored him. The room waited. Then Ethan spoke. One word. Just one. Starlight. Seraphina froze. Her breath caught. The sound of that name crashed into her like a wave. Nobody called her that. Nobody. Not for 20 years. Not since. Her heart began pounding. No. It couldn't be. The man standing across the room was one of the richest men in America. A billionaire. A business icon. Someone who appeared on magazine covers. Someone she had never met. At least that was what she had always believed. Yet the way he looked at her, the way his voice trembled, the way he said that name, it felt impossible. And for the first time since entering the wedding, Seraphina felt afraid. Real fear. The kind that reached into old wounds and shook them awake. Ethan took a step forward. Then another. His eyes never left hers. "Sir," his assistant whispered again. The ceremony. Ethan didn't even glance at him. He looked only at Seraphina. As if everyone else had disappeared. As if the hundreds of guests in the cathedral no longer existed. Then Victoria Bennett stood abruptly. "What is going on?" she demanded. Her sharp voice shattered the silence. Ethan finally blinked. The moment broke. And Seraphina immediately looked away. No. This was ridiculous. Whoever this man was, he wasn't the person she was thinking about. Because that person was gone. Gone for 20 years. Gone since childhood. Gone since promises stopped meaning anything. Without another glance, she turned and walked toward an empty seat near the back. Whispers erupted instantly. "Why is she here?" "I thought she left the family." "Isn't that the adopted daughter?" Look at Claire's face. What did Ethan Cole mean by Starlight? The questions spread faster than wildfire. But Seraphina ignored all of them. She sat down, crossed her hands, and stared ahead. The ceremony resumed. The bride smiled again. The groom forced himself to focus. The guests settled. But something had changed. Because every few seconds, Seraphina could feel Ethan Cole staring at her. And somehow, that terrified her more than being in the same room as the family that had broken her heart. Before we continue, welcome to Love Stories with Charis. If you enjoy emotional stories about love, betrayal, family secrets, and second chances, don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let's go back to where it all began. Back before Billionaires. Back before heartbreak. Back before anyone knew the name Seraphina Bennett. 20 years earlier. The orphanage was quiet. Too quiet. Seraphina hated quiet. Quiet meant nobody was coming. Quiet meant another family had visited and chosen somebody else. Quiet meant another child would leave while she stayed behind. At 4 years old, she didn't understand much about the world. But she understood being unwanted. She sat alone on a small swing in the playground. Her tiny legs kicked softly against the dirt. Above her, stars filled the night sky. She stared at them. When she was sad, she always looked at the stars. When she was scared, she looked at the stars. When she missed parents she couldn't even remember, she looked at the stars. The stars never left. Unlike everyone else. "You're doing it again." She looked up. A boy stood in front of her. 6 years old. Korean. Skinny. Scruffy. Always pretending he wasn't afraid. Minjae. Her best friend. The only person who never made her feel alone. I'm thinking, she said. Minjae rolled his eyes. No. You're hiding. I'm not. You are. She crossed her arms. He sat beside her. For a moment neither spoke. Then he looked at the sky. You always look at the stars. She shrugged. They stay. What stays? The stars. Minjae frowned. What does that mean? It means they don't leave. The boy stared at her. Then he looked back at the sky. Finally he smiled. A small smile. But genuine. Then that's your name. What? Starlight. Seraphina laughed. That's not my name. It is now. No. Yes. No. Yes. She laughed harder. The sound echoed through the playground. Minjae grinned. There. What? You laughed. So? You only laugh when you're with me. Seraphina stuck out her tongue. Minjae gasped dramatically. How disrespectful. She laughed again. And for a few precious minutes, neither child felt abandoned. Neither child felt forgotten. They were simply two friends beneath the stars. Later that night, they sat together in the dormitory. Most of the children were already asleep. Minjae leaned closer. What if somebody adopts one of us? Seraphina's smile disappeared. The question scared her. Because it happened all the time. Families came. Children left. Promises were made. Promises were broken. And nobody ever came back. She lowered her eyes. I don't know. Minjae thought for a moment. Then he held out his pinky finger. Let's make a promise. What kind? His expression became serious. The most serious she'd ever seen. No matter what happens. She stared at him. No matter who comes. His voice softened. No matter who gets chosen. He hooked his little finger around hers. We stay together. Seraphina blinked. What if they only want one of us? Then they take both. What if they say no? We make them say yes. She laughed. That's impossible. Minjae shook his head. No. His eyes were determined. It's not. For the first time, Seraphina believed him. Really? Really? She squeezed his finger. You promise? Minjae nodded. I promise. The little girl smiled. I promise too. Neither child knew that before the month was over, that promise would be tested. And only one of them would leave. While the other would spend years wondering why. The promise lasted exactly 19 days. 19 days between the night they swore they would never be separated and the morning everything changed. It started with a fever. Minjae woke up shivering. By noon he could barely sit upright. By evening he was confined to a small room near the infirmary while one of the caretakers placed cold cloths on his forehead. I have to go back, he protested weakly. No. I need to be with Starlight. You need to rest. Minjae tried to stand. His legs immediately gave out. The caretaker pushed him gently back onto the bed. Stop being stubborn. I'm not stubborn. You absolutely are. I'm serious. The woman sighed. So am I. Minjae stared at the door. A strange feeling sat heavily in his chest. Fear. The kind he couldn't explain. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. Meanwhile, outside, several children had already been lined up. The orphanage director stood nervously near the entrance. A luxury car had just pulled into the driveway. Then another. The staff exchanged excited glances. Important people. Wealthy people. Potential adopters. Children immediately sat straighter. Hope was dangerous in a place like this. Yet nobody could help it. Maybe today would be their day. Maybe today someone would finally choose them. 4-year-old Seraphina stood quietly at the back. Her eyes kept drifting toward the building where Minjae was resting. She hated that he wasn't there. The director clapped her hands. Everyone smiled. Several children immediately forced awkward smiles. Seraphina didn't. A few moments later a man and woman entered. Richard and Victoria Bennett. Elegant. Confident. Wealthy. The type of people who never worried about whether there would be food tomorrow. The director greeted them enthusiastically. Welcome. Victoria smiled politely. Thank you. Richard glanced around. Children smiled nervously. Some waved. Others lowered their heads. Seraphina simply watched. The adults walked down the line, asking questions, observing, listening. The process felt strange, almost like being examined. Eventually, Victoria stopped in front of a boy. "What is your favorite subject?" The child answered immediately. The questioning continued. Then suddenly a loud crash echoed from inside the building. Everyone turned. One of the younger children had fallen while carrying a tray. Several cups shattered across the floor. A caretaker immediately snapped. "Honestly, what is wrong with you?" The little boy's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't clean this mess." The boy started crying. The guests watched awkwardly. Most children looked away. Most children had learned long ago that drawing attention was dangerous. But not Seraphina. She stepped forward. "He's not stupid." The room froze. The caretaker stared. "What?" "He's not stupid." The woman frowned. "Excuse me." He dropped the tray. So people make mistakes." The caretaker looked horrified. "Young lady, Minjae says everyone makes mistakes." The director looked ready to faint. Victoria raised an eyebrow. Richard suddenly seemed interested. Seraphina continued before anyone could stop her. And he didn't mean to fall. The crying boy stared at her. The room remained silent. Then Richard asked softly, "Who's Minjae?" A smile immediately appeared on her face. "My best friend." "Where is he?" "He's sick." Concern entered her voice. "He wanted to come." Richard exchanged a glance with Victoria. Something passed between them. Something neither child nor staff noticed. The director quickly tried to redirect attention. "She's very outspoken." Clearly, Victoria replied. But she wasn't annoyed. If anything, she seemed intrigued. The visit continued. Yet both Richard and Victoria kept finding themselves watching Seraphina. The little girl wasn't trying to impress them. Wasn't trying to be chosen. Wasn't performing. She was simply being herself. And somehow that stood out more than anything else. Later that afternoon, the couple sat with the director privately. The paperwork had already been prepared. A different child had originally been expected to leave with them. Everything had been discussed weeks earlier. Everything had been planned. Yet Victoria couldn't stop thinking about the little girl. "Seraphina." The director blinked. "You mean the black child?" Richard immediately frowned. The question annoyed him. "Yes, Seraphina." The director shifted uncomfortably. She wasn't part of the original discussion. Victoria nodded. "I know." The room fell silent. Finally, Richard smiled slightly. Life rarely follows original plans. The director looked stunned. "You're serious?" Victoria looked out the window. She could see Seraphina sitting alone beneath a tree, looking toward the infirmary building, waiting for her friend. Very serious. The paperwork changed that same day, and nobody told Seraphina. The next morning, she was called into the office. She arrived confused. The director smiled. A nervous smile. "Good news." Seraphina looked around. "What happened?" The woman knelt beside her. "A family wants to adopt you." The little girl's eyes widened. For a moment, she simply stared. Then excitement exploded across her face. "Really? Really? Oh." She jumped up immediately, then stopped. The excitement vanished. "What about Minjae?" The director hesitated. "Just long enough." Seraphina noticed. "What about him?" "We're talking about you right now." The little girl shook her head. "No." The director blinked. "No, we promised." The woman felt her heart sink. "Seraphina, we go together." The director looked away, suddenly unable to meet her eyes. "We can't decide that." The little girl frowned. "Why not?" "Because life wasn't fair. Because promises made by children meant nothing to adults. Because some people got chosen and others didn't." "But how do you explain that to a 4-year-old?" The director swallowed. "Sometimes things don't happen the way we want." Seraphina's eyes filled with tears. "No." The word came out small. "Fragile." "No." A few minutes later, she was standing beside the Bennetts, a small backpack in her hands. The car waited outside. Everything felt wrong. Where was Minjae? Why wasn't he here? Why hadn't they let her see him? She searched every window, every doorway, every corner. Then she spotted him. Second floor. Behind a glass window. Min-jae. Pale. Weak. But standing. Their eyes met. For one terrible moment neither moved. Then Seraphina started running. Min-jae. Caretakers grabbed her. Wait. She struggled. Let me go. Tears streamed down her face. Min-jae. Above, the boy slammed his hands against the glass. Starlight. The sound barely reached her. But she heard it. She heard him. And that made everything worse. Please, she cried. Please let me see him. Nobody moved. Nobody helped. Min-jae was crying now too. The strongest boy she knew. Crying. Because for the first time in his life, there was nothing he could do. Nothing he could protect. Nothing he could fix. Seraphina stretched her arm toward the building. Don't leave me. Min-jae hit the glass again. I'll find you. The words were muffled. Almost impossible to hear. But she saw them. She understood. I'll find you. The car door closed. And as it drove away, two children watched their promise break apart. Neither of them knew it would take 20 years before they saw each other again. And neither knew that the next chapter of Seraphina's life would hurt far more than the separation itself. Because being chosen wasn't the same thing as being loved. For the first few months, Seraphina thought she had found a miracle. The Bennett estate was bigger than anything she had ever imagined. She had her own room, her own bed, her own closet. Nobody fought over food. Nobody counted slices of bread. Nobody worried about winter coats. Every morning she woke up expecting it all to disappear. Every morning it was still there. At first, Richard and Victoria treated her like a daughter. Not a guest. Not a charity case. A daughter. Richard helped her learn to ride a bicycle. Victoria braided her hair herself. They attended school events. Read bedtime stories. Listened when she talked. And for the first time in her life, Seraphina allowed herself to believe something dangerous. Maybe she belonged somewhere. Maybe this family was hers. Maybe she would never be abandoned again. One evening, nearly a year after her adoption, Richard found her staring out a window. What are you thinking about? Min-jae. Richard sat beside her. The friend from the orphanage? She nodded. I promised I'd wait for him. Richard smiled gently. Friendships like that don't disappear. You think so? I know so. Will I see him again? Richard hesitated, then squeezed her shoulder. Life has a funny way of bringing people back together. At the time, he believed it. At the time, he meant every word. Years passed. Seraphina grew older, smarter, kinder. The Bennetts became her world. Then Victoria got pregnant. Everything changed. At first, Seraphina was excited. A baby, a little sister, someone to love. Someone to protect. She spent months talking to Victoria's stomach. Months imagining what the baby would look like. Months planning games they would play together. Then Claire Bennett was born. And slowly, almost invisibly, Seraphina's place in the family began to shrink. Nobody announced it. Nobody said it aloud. But she felt it. The bedtime stories stopped. The family dinners became shorter. The hugs became less frequent. The attention moved elsewhere. Toward the tiny blonde-haired baby everyone adored. Look at her eyes. Look at her smile. She looks exactly like Victoria. The comments never stopped. And eventually Seraphina realized something. Nobody ever said she looked like the family. Nobody ever said she belonged. At 9 years old, she attended a large family gathering. One she would never forget. Richard's older sister, Margaret Bennett, arrived late. The woman had never liked Seraphina. Even as a child, Seraphina could feel it. Margaret barely acknowledged her existence. That evening was no different. Claire sat happily on Margaret's lap. Everyone laughed. Everyone smiled. Then Margaret glanced toward Seraphina. The smile disappeared. She's getting older. The room became quiet. Victoria shifted uncomfortably. Richard frowned. Margaret continued. You should think carefully. About what? Richard asked. About expectations. Richard's voice hardened. What does that mean? Margaret looked directly at Seraphina. Children become attached. The little girl immediately understood. Even before the adults did. Margaret wasn't talking about children. She was talking about her. Richard stood. Enough. Margaret shrugged. I'm simply being honest. No. His voice turned cold. You're being cruel. For a moment Seraphina felt relieved. Richard was defending her. Just like always. But something changed that night. Not immediately. Gradually. Like a crack spreading through glass. Because Margaret wasn't the only person thinking those thoughts. Other relatives whispered. Other friends made comments. Other people reminded Victoria and Richard that Claire was their real daughter. Their blood. Their legacy. Their future. And over time, those voices grew louder. By the time Seraphina was 13, the difference was impossible to ignore. Family vacations revolved around Claire. Special celebrations revolved around Claire. Conversations revolved around Claire. Even photographs told the story. Claire stood in the center. Seraphina stood near the edge. One afternoon, she noticed something that made her stomach twist. A new family portrait had arrived. A large one. Expensive. Beautiful. It hung in the main hallway. Richard. Victoria. Claire. And no Seraphina. She stared at it for nearly a minute. Certain there had been some mistake. Then Victoria walked past. Oh. Victoria stopped. For a moment guilt flashed across her face. It was a scheduling issue. Seraphina looked at her. A scheduling issue? The photographer came while you were at school. The explanation sounded weak. Both of them knew it. Seraphina forced a smile. It's okay. Victoria immediately relaxed. Good. Then she walked away. Just like that. Leaving Seraphina alone with the portrait. That night she cried into her pillow. Not because of the picture. Because Victoria never asked if she was hurt. Never apologized. Never even pretended to care. And deep down, Seraphina knew why. Because if Claire had been excluded, the portrait would never have been hung. At 14, she finally returned to the orphanage. The trip had taken months to arrange. Part of her was terrified. Part of her was hopeful. Maybe Minjae had come back. Maybe someone knew where he was. Maybe. The director recognized her immediately. Seraphina. She smiled. Then noticed the girl's expression. The hope. The desperation. And her own smile faded. You came for him. Seraphina swallowed. Do you know where he is? The woman looked away. That was answer enough. When? The director sighed. 2 years after you left. Seraphina's chest tightened. He waited. The woman nodded. Every word felt like a knife. He waited a long time. The girl stared at the floor. What happened? A foster family took him. Where? We don't know. Seraphina looked up. You don't know. I'm sorry. The apology shattered her. Because she finally understood. Minjae was gone. Not temporarily. Gone. The one person who had promised never to leave. The one person who had loved her before money, status, and expectations complicated everything. Gone. That evening she sat alone outside the estate, looking at the stars. Just like she had as a child. Starlight. The nickname echoed in her memory. And for the first time in years, she let herself cry for him. Not because she blamed him, but because she missed him. More than she had ever admitted. Little did she know that while she sat beneath those stars mourning a lost friend, a boy on the other side of the world was doing the exact same thing. And fate was already moving them toward each other. But before that could happen, Seraphina would lose something else. Someone else. And this heartbreak would hurt even more. Because the next person to enter her life wouldn't be a friend. Seraphina met Nathan Sinclair on the worst day of her week. She was 16. Exhausted from school. Frustrated by another family event where she had spent 3 hours feeling invisible. And completely unprepared for the boy who walked into the Bennett estate carrying a basketball under one arm and an attitude under the other. You must be Claire. Those were the first words he said to her. Seraphina looked up from the book she was reading. Then she laughed. Nathan frowned. What? You guessed wrong. His confidence disappeared instantly. Oh. She smiled. Oh. He rubbed the back of his neck. Sorry. It's okay. You're not Claire. No. Nathan looked confused. The confusion lasted long enough for Seraphina to enjoy it. Then Claire appeared. The difference in treatment was immediate. Victoria rushed forward. Richard greeted him warmly. Claire practically glowed. And suddenly everything made sense. Nathan Sinclair wasn't just another visitor. He was the son of one of the most influential families in the country, the future heir to the Sinclair business empire. And judging by the way their parents were behaving, everybody already had plans for him. Plans that involved Claire. Nathan noticed it too. Later that evening, he found Seraphina alone on the terrace. "They're ridiculous." She laughed softly. "You noticed? They've practically planned my wedding." Seraphina nearly choked. Nathan grinned. "See? Even you know it's crazy." The conversation lasted 10 minutes. Then 30. Then an hour. And somehow it became the easiest conversation either of them had experienced in months. Nathan kept visiting. Officially for family dinners. Unofficially for Seraphina. At first neither acknowledged it. Then neither could ignore it. One afternoon they sat beneath a tree near the university campus. Nathan tossed a small stone. "You know something?" "What?" "I don't think your family likes me talking to you." Seraphina looked away. The answer was obvious. Nathan immediately understood. "Oh, yeah, that's messed up." She smiled sadly. "You get used to it." Nathan's expression hardened. "No." "What?" "You shouldn't have to get used to it." For some reason those words affected her more than they should have. Maybe because nobody else ever said things like that. Nobody else ever looked angry on her behalf. Nobody else ever made her feel seen. Weeks turned into months. Months turned into years. Their friendship became something deeper. Something impossible to hide. Then came the night everything exploded. It happened during Claire's 18th birthday celebration. The estate was full of guests. Business partners. Family friends. Important people. Nathan spent most of the evening trying to avoid attention. Unfortunately, Claire had other plans. "Come dance with me." Nathan smiled politely. "I'm good." Claire frowned. "You've barely spoken to me all night." Nathan glanced across the room. Toward Seraphina. That was all it took. Claire followed his gaze. And suddenly she understood. The smile disappeared from her face. Hours later she stormed into Victoria's private sitting room. "He likes her." Victoria froze. "What?" "He likes Seraphina." Victoria immediately stood. "No. It's true." Claire's voice cracked. "I saw the way he looks at her." Richard arrived shortly afterward. The argument lasted nearly 2 hours. For the first time in years, Seraphina heard her name repeated again and again behind closed doors. Not with affection. Not with pride. With frustration. With fear. With resentment. The next morning Victoria called her into the study. Richard was already there. Neither looked happy. The moment Seraphina entered, her stomach dropped. Something was wrong. Very wrong. "Sit down." She obeyed. Victoria folded her hands. "We need to talk." Seraphina looked from one parent to the other. Neither met her eyes. The silence became unbearable. Finally Richard spoke. "It's about Nathan." Her chest tightened. "What about him?" Victoria answered. "You need to stop seeing him." The words landed like a punch. Seraphina stared, certain she had misunderstood. "What?" "You heard me." "No." Her voice shook. "What are you talking about?" Victoria's expression hardened. "Claire has feelings for him." The room spun. Seraphina blinked. Once. Twice. Then laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You're serious?" "Very." Seraphina turned toward Richard. Waiting. Expecting him to say something. Anything. Instead, he looked away. That hurt more than Victoria's words. "Richard?" The fact that she used his first name instead of Dad made him flinch. Still, he said nothing. Seraphina felt something inside her break. Slowly. Painfully. "Do I get a say?" Victoria answered immediately. "No." The single word echoed through the room. No. As if her feelings didn't matter. As if her heart didn't matter. As if she didn't matter. Tears burned behind her eyes. "You adopted me." Victoria stiffened. What does that have to do with this? Everything. Her voice cracked. You told me I was family. You are family. No. The answer came instantly. More honestly than anything she had said in years. No. Victoria's face darkened. Watch your tone. Seraphina stood. No. Again. The same word. The same truth. No. Years of pain spilled out at once. The pictures. Silence. The holidays. Silence. The birthdays. Silence. The way everyone treats me. Richard closed his eyes, as if he couldn't bear hearing it. But Seraphina wasn't finished. You knew. Victoria looked away. That was answer enough. You knew all along. Her voice dropped to a whisper. And you let it happen. Nobody denied it. Nobody could. Then came the final blow. Victoria took a deep breath. If you continue seeing Nathan. The room became still. You will no longer receive financial support from this family. Seraphina froze. The threat was clear. Choose Nathan. Or lose everything. Her home. Her education. Her future. Everything. The silence that followed felt endless. Finally she laughed. A small broken laugh. Because suddenly everything made sense. The family. The conditions. The expectations. The sacrifices. The truth. Their love had always come with terms. And now the bill had arrived. You already chose. Victoria frowned. What? Seraphina looked directly at her. You chose Claire. Then she turned toward Richard. Waiting. One final time. Waiting for him to stop this. Waiting for him to defend her. Waiting for him to be her father. He never did. And in that moment, she understood something she would never forget. Sometimes the deepest betrayal isn't being abandoned. It's watching someone stay and still choose not to fight for you. The next day, Seraphina called Nathan. And before the week was over, she would break both their hearts. Nathan knew something was wrong the moment he heard her voice. Can we meet? 3 simple words. Yet they sounded heavier than anything Seraphina had ever said to him. Of course. They met at a small park halfway between the university and the Bennett estate. The same place where they had spent countless afternoons talking about everything and nothing. The same place where Nathan had first realized he was falling in love with her. The same place where Seraphina was about to destroy both their futures. Nathan arrived first. By the time she appeared, his stomach was already in knots. One look at her face told him everything. Something had happened. What's wrong? Seraphina sat down. For several seconds, she couldn't speak. The words felt trapped inside her throat. Nathan moved closer. Sarah. She closed her eyes. The nickname almost broke her resolve. What happened? The concern in his voice hurt. Because he genuinely cared. Because he genuinely loved her. Because she was about to throw all of it away. Finally, she forced herself to look at him. We need to stop seeing each other. The color drained from his face. What? Her heart shattered. But she continued. We can't do this anymore. Nathan stared. Waiting for the joke. Waiting for the explanation. Waiting for the part that made sense. It never came. Sarah. His voice was barely audible. What are you talking about? She looked away. Because if she looked at him any longer, she would change her mind. It's over. No. The answer came immediately. No. His hands tightened into fists. No, it's not. Nathan. Tell me what's actually going on. Tears burned her eyes. She swallowed them. Forced them down. This is what's going on. You're lying. The certainty in his voice almost made her smile. Even now he knew her. Even now he could see through her. Nathan stood. Frustration flashed across his face. Did someone say something? Silence. His expression changed. Slowly. Dangerously. The Bennetts. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Nathan already knew. They threatened you. Again, silence. Nathan ran a hand through his hair. Disbelief filled his face. I'll talk to them. No. I'll fix this. You can't. I can. No. Her voice finally cracked. Nathan, please. For the first time, he heard genuine pain. And suddenly his anger disappeared. What are they doing to you? The question nearly destroyed her. Because nobody else had asked. Nobody else had cared enough to ask. For a brief moment, she wanted to tell him everything. The years of exclusion. The loneliness. The conditions attached to love. The ultimatum. All of it. Instead, she stood. And stepped backward. Away from him. Away from the life she wanted. Away from the person she loved. I'm sorry. Nathan's eyes widened. No. I'm sorry. Sarah, don't do this. His voice broke. And hearing that nearly broke her too. But she couldn't risk it. Couldn't risk his future. Couldn't risk losing her education. Couldn't risk becoming completely dependent on a family that had already made their choice. So she did the hardest thing she had ever done. She walked away. Nathan didn't follow. Not because he didn't want to. Because he was too shocked to move. And as Seraphina disappeared down the path, both of them felt something important die. That night Nathan called 23 times. She answered none. The next day he sent messages. She ignored them. The day after that he showed up at her university. She left through another exit. Every rejection felt like a knife. Every unanswered call felt like betrayal. But eventually the messages stopped. And the silence that followed was somehow worse. Weeks passed. Then months. The Bennett estate became unbearable. Victoria acted as though nothing had happened. Claire walked around happier than ever. Richard barely spoke. Meanwhile, Seraphina felt herself disappearing. One evening, she entered the dining room and found only 3 place settings. 3. Not 4. Nobody mentioned it. Nobody explained. Claire sat happily beside Victoria. Richard focused on his food. And Seraphina understood. The message couldn't have been clearer if they had said it aloud. She was no longer truly part of the family. Later that night, she packed a suitcase. Not because she planned to leave immediately. Because for the first time she knew she would. The decision settled quietly inside her heart. Like a seed waiting to grow. 1 year later, she graduated. And 2 weeks after graduation, she moved out. The reaction was surprisingly calm. Victoria claimed she supported independence. Richard said it was part of growing up. Claire barely looked up from her phone. The performance would have been convincing if Seraphina didn't know the truth. Nobody was fighting for her to stay. Nobody was begging her not to go. Nobody was crying. The realization hurt. Even though she expected it. Richard helped carry 1 box to her car. Only one. As they stood outside her new apartment building, an awkward silence settled between them. Finally, Richard spoke. You know we love you. Seraphina looked at him. Really looked at him. The man who had once defended her. The man who had once promised she belonged. The man who had slowly stopped fighting. I know you wanted to. His face fell. The answer hit harder than anger ever could. She smiled sadly. Then hugged him. And walked away. For the first time in her life, Seraphina truly belonged to herself. The apartment was tiny. The furniture mismatched. The kitchen barely functional. And she loved it. Because nobody could take it away. Nobody could threaten it. Nobody could make conditions. Every success belonged to her. Every failure belonged to her. The freedom was terrifying. And beautiful. She worked during the day. Studied law at night. Built a life 1 step at a time. Some days were difficult. Some days she cried. But she never regretted leaving. Then 3 years passed. 3 peaceful years. Until one phone call changed everything. The screen displayed a name she hadn't seen in months. Claire Bennett. Seraphina almost ignored it. Almost. Then curiosity won. She answered. Hello. Claire's voice came immediately. I didn't think you'd pick up. Seraphina smiled humorlessly. I almost didn't. A pause. Then Claire laughed. The sound instantly irritated her. Still dramatic, I see. And you're still rude. Claire ignored the comment. I have news. Seraphina already knew she wasn't going to like it. What news? I'm getting married. The words landed heavily. Not because she still loved Nathan. But because she knew exactly who Claire meant. Nathan Sinclair. Of course. Claire sounded delighted. The wedding is next month. Seraphina remained silent. Then Claire delivered the real reason for the call. You should come. That surprised her. Why? Another pause. Then came the truth. Because I want you to see. Seraphina's eyes narrowed. See what? That I won. The cruelty was so casual. So effortless. It almost impressed her. Claire continued. You spent years thinking people would choose you. Silence. They didn't. More silence. They chose me. The call ended shortly afterward. But Claire's word stayed. For days. For weeks. Until eventually Seraphina made a decision. Not out of jealousy. Not out of bitterness. Not even because of Nathan. She would attend that wedding for herself. For closure. For proof that she was no longer the broken girl they remembered. What she didn't know was that the wedding would change far more than her relationship with the Bennetts. Because somewhere across the country, billionaire Ethan Cole was about to receive an invitation too. And the moment he saw Seraphina again, a 20-year search would finally come to an end. Seraphina expected. She almost didn't go. 3 separate times she stood in front of her closet and considered staying home. 3 separate times she reminded herself why she was doing this. Not for Claire. Not for Nathan. Not for the Bennetts. For herself. She refused to spend the rest of her life wondering if she had been strong enough to face the people who had hurt her. So she put on the emerald dress. The one she'd bought after winning her first major legal case. The one that reminded her how far she'd come. Then she drove to the cathedral. By the time she arrived, guests were already filing inside. Most didn't recognize her immediately. Those who did stared, whispered, pointed. Seraphina ignored them all. Years ago those looks would have crushed her. Now they barely registered. She walked inside. Head high, shoulders back. Unafraid. Then everything happened exactly as she expected. Victoria looked horrified. Claire looked furious. Richard looked guilty. Nathan looked stunned. Only one reaction surprised her. Ethan Cole. The billionaire. The man whose face appeared on magazine covers and business channels. The man she'd never met. The man who looked at her as though she'd reached into his chest and stolen his breath. Then came the word. Starlight. Even now, sitting through the ceremony, she couldn't stop hearing it. The nickname echoed endlessly inside her mind. Starlight. The name Minjae had given her. The name nobody else knew. The name she'd buried alongside countless childhood memories. By the end of the ceremony, she had convinced herself it was a coincidence. It had to be. Anything else would be impossible. As guests moved toward the reception hall, Seraphina quietly slipped away. She wasn't interested in speeches. Or dancing. Or pretending. She had accomplished what she'd come to do. She had faced them. And survived. That was enough. She was halfway to her car when a voice stopped her. Seraphina. She turned. Nathan. Of course. For a moment neither spoke. 3 years vanished between them. 3 years of silence. 3 years of unanswered questions. Nathan smiled sadly. You look good. She laughed softly. That's your opening line? It was either that or why did you break my heart? The honesty caught her off guard. For a second they both smiled. Then the smile faded. Nathan shoved his hands into his pockets. I missed you. Seraphina closed her eyes briefly. Nathan. I know. His voice was gentle. I know. The sadness in his face hurt more than anger ever could. I wanted answers. He swallowed. Then eventually I realized you probably needed peace more than I needed answers. Tears threatened. Again. Somehow they always did around him. I'm sorry. Nathan nodded. I know. The silence returned. Comfortable this time. Bittersweet. Then Nathan laughed. You know the crazy thing? What? I never stopped thinking about you. Seraphina looked away. The confession arrived years too late. For both of them. Before she could respond, another voice interrupted. Nathan. Claire. Standing several feet away. Watching. Waiting. Nathan immediately stepped back. Not because he wanted to. Because he had to. And seeing that finally gave Seraphina the closure she'd been searching for. Nathan had become exactly what the families wanted. A symbol. An alliance. A business arrangement. The boy she loved no longer existed. And maybe that was okay. Nathan looked at her one final time, then smiled. A real smile. I hope you're happy. The words surprised her, because he meant them. Genuinely. For the first time in years, she smiled back. I am. Nathan nodded, then walked away. And with that, an old chapter finally closed. 4 days later, Ethan Cole still couldn't think about anything else. Not the billion-dollar acquisition his company was negotiating. Not the interviews. Not the meetings. Not the investors. Nothing. Only her. Seraphina. Starlight. The nickname haunted him. Because it wasn't coincidence. It couldn't be. 20 years earlier, there had been only one Starlight. Only one little girl who stared at the sky when she was afraid. Only one person who mattered enough to remember. His assistant entered the office. You have another meeting in 20 minutes. Ethan ignored him. The assistant sighed. You're thinking about her again. Finally, Ethan looked up. What do we know? The assistant immediately understood who he meant. Not much. Because Ethan had already asked 3 times that day. Attorney. Ethan listened. 27 years old. Another nod. Graduated with honors. His chest swelled with pride. Ridiculous. He hadn't seen her in 2 decades. Yet hearing she'd succeeded felt personal. The assistant continued. Lives alone. Ethan's smile disappeared. Alone. Of course she was alone. The realization hurt more than expected. Anything else? The assistant hesitated, then shook his head. No. Ethan stood. Decision made. I'm going. The assistant blinked. Going where? Ethan grabbed his keys. To find her. 40 minutes later, he stood outside a modest apartment building. Nothing luxurious. Nothing flashy. Just ordinary. The kind of place nobody would associate with a billionaire's long-lost search. For several moments, he simply stared. His heart pounded. Ridiculous. He negotiated billion-dollar deals without blinking. Yet one woman had reduced him to a nervous 26-year-old again. Eventually he knocked. Once. Twice. Footsteps approached. The door opened. And there she was. Seraphina. For a moment neither moved. Neither spoke. 20 years collapsed into silence. Then she frowned. How did you find me? Ethan almost laughed. The question was so very her. No greeting. No shock. Straight to the point. Instead, he asked his own question. A question he'd carried for 20 years. A question nobody else in the world could answer. Do you still count stars when you're scared? Everything stopped. The color drained from Seraphina's face. The world tilted. No. 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 That wasn't possible. Only one person knew that. Only one. Her voice barely worked. What did you say? Ethan smiled. And suddenly she saw him. Not the billionaire. Not the businessman. Not the public figure. The boy. The 6-year-old boy who had stood beside her beneath orphanage skies. The boy who had promised never to leave. The boy she'd spent 20 years missing. His eyes glistened. Just slightly. Then he whispered the word she'd carried inside her heart for 2 decades. Starlight. The walls she'd spent years building collapsed instantly. Minjae? His smile broke. The same smile. Older. Wiser. But for a long moment, real. Finally real. When they eventually pulled apart, both of them laughed through tears. You cry a lot more now, Seraphina said. Minjae immediately pointed at her face. Look who's talking. She laughed harder. The sound filled the small apartment. And for the first time in years, it felt effortless. Natural. Like no time had passed at all. Minjae looked around. The apartment. The books. The framed law degree. The evidence of the life she'd built alone. Pride filled his chest. You became a lawyer. Seraphina smiled. I did. I always knew you would do something amazing. She rolled her eyes. You were 6. And I was right. She laughed again. Then the smile slowly faded. A question had been sitting inside her chest since the moment she recognized him. Why didn't you come back? The words came out softly. Not angry. Just hurt. Minjae's face fell. And suddenly she regretted asking. But he nodded. He understood. She deserved an answer. I tried. Seraphina froze. What? I tried. His voice thickened. The foster family that took me moved overseas. He looked away. I searched when I got older. Her heart pounded. You searched. A bitter laugh escaped him. For years. The room became silent. Min-jae continued. I didn't know your last name. Another pause. I didn't know where you went. Another. I only knew your first name. Seraphina felt tears gathering again. I thought you forgot. The confession slipped out before she could stop it. Min-jae stared at her, then shook his head immediately. Never. The answer came so quickly that she believed him instantly. Not once. His eyes glistened. I looked for orphanage records. Seraphina covered her mouth. I hired investigators. The tears started falling. I checked every lead. A shaky breath escaped her. You did all that? Min-jae smiled sadly. You're my starlight. And just like that, she started crying again. Not because she was sad. Because somebody had chosen her. Not temporarily. Not conditionally. Not when it was convenient. Chosen her. For 20 years. Without seeing her. Without speaking to her. Without knowing where she was. The realization was overwhelming. Hours passed. They talked about everything. The orphanage. The years apart. The lives they'd built. The people they'd become. Min-jae told her about the family who adopted him. A loving couple who had given him everything. Support. Guidance. Belonging. They were good people. Seraphina smiled. I'm glad. So am I. Then he looked at her carefully. What about the Bennetts? The smile disappeared. Min-jae immediately noticed. His expression hardened. They hurt you. It wasn't a question. She looked away. And that was all the answer he needed. Something dangerous flashed across his face. The protective little boy was still there. Buried beneath wealth and adulthood. But still there. They don't matter anymore. Seraphina's voice was calm. Certain. And surprisingly true. Months earlier she would have spoken with bitterness. With anger. With pain. Now? Nothing. The wounds had finally stopped bleeding. The Bennetts no longer controlled her life. Her happiness. Her future. Min-jae studied her. Then smiled. You've gotten stronger. So have you. He laughed. I had to. The conversation continued late into the night. Neither wanted it to end. Neither wanted to waste another minute. For the first time since childhood, they weren't separated by circumstances. Or distance. Or other people. And neither intended to lose the other again. Meanwhile, trouble was brewing elsewhere. 3 weeks after Claire's wedding, news broke. At first it appeared online. Then television networks picked it up. Then financial investigators got involved. By the end of the month, it was everywhere. Corruption. Fraud. Hidden debt. Illegal transfers. The Sinclair and Bennett empires were under investigation. The scandal exploded. Business partners fled. Investors panicked. Accounts were frozen. Properties were seized. The empire Richard Bennett had spent decades building began collapsing in real time. For years the families had hidden behind wealth, power, status. Now none of it could protect them. One afternoon Seraphina sat in her apartment watching the news. A younger version of herself would have celebrated, would have enjoyed seeing karma arrive. Instead, she simply turned off the television. Min-jae noticed. You're not happy about it. She shrugged. I don't care enough to be happy. The answer surprised even her. Because it was true. The opposite of love wasn't hate. It was indifference. And she had finally reached it. Several days later, there was a knock at her door. When she opened it, her breath caught. Richard Bennett stood there. Older. Tired. Smaller somehow. The powerful businessman she once knew seemed gone. For several moments neither spoke. Finally Richard smiled sadly. Hi, sweetheart. The old nickname almost broke her heart. Almost. Hello, Richard. He winced. The distance in her voice hurt. As it should. For a moment he simply looked at her. Then tears filled his eyes. Real tears. I failed you. The confession stunned her. Richard swallowed hard. I should have protected you. Silence. I should have fought harder. More silence. I should have been your father. This time tears filled his eyes completely. And for the first time, Seraphina saw the weight he had been carrying. The guilt. The regret. The shame. Richard looked away. I thought there would be time. His voice cracked. There wasn't. Seraphina felt something inside her soften. Not because the pain disappeared. Not because the past changed. Because she could finally see the truth. Richard had loved her. Just not enough. And sometimes that was its own tragedy. After a long silence, she stepped forward. And hugged him. Richard broke down completely. Years of regret pouring out at once. I'm sorry. The words repeated again and again. Seraphina closed her eyes. Then finally whispered. I know. And surprisingly, that was enough. Not reconciliation. Not a perfect ending. Just peace. Months later, life looked very different. The scandals continued. The Bennett empire was gone. The Sinclair empire was struggling. The people who once ruled every room now lived ordinary lives. Yet somehow Seraphina didn't feel victorious. She felt free. One evening, she stood on the balcony of her apartment. The stars glittered overhead, exactly as they had 20 years earlier. A familiar voice spoke behind her. You still do it. She smiled. Do what? Look at the stars. Minjae stepped beside her. She glanced at him. The boy who became a billionaire. The friend who kept his promise. The person who never stopped searching. And somehow, after everything, the person who felt most like home. You know, he said softly, I spent years looking into crowds. She turned toward him. Why? His smile was gentle. Hoping I'd find my starlight. Tears filled her eyes. Again. He laughed. You cry even more now. She hit his arm. Lightly. Then laughed too. The city lights shimmered below. The stars shone above. And for the first time in her life, Seraphina realized something. The greatest loss of her childhood wasn't losing a family. It was losing the one person who truly saw her. And the greatest gift of her adulthood was finding him again. 20 years earlier, 2 children had made a promise in an orphanage. A promise the world tried very hard to break. But somehow, against all odds, they kept it. And that made all the difference. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Love Stories with Charis, and tell us in the comments. Do you think Minjae would have found Seraphina eventually if she had never attended the wedding? Until next time, remember this. The people who are meant for you may get lost along the way. But sometimes, after years of heartbreak, life finds a way to bring them home.